Quiz on Monday is on 4.1 and 4.2. On the review, it's 5 pages, but you only have to do the first 3. The second 2 are just there. They're like puzzle with questions. So the answers are on it. Those are just for extra practice if you want extra practice with any of these questions. So let's look at 4.1, the first one. Number 1. It says to decide whether the function is a polynomial function. If so, write it in standard form and state its degree, type, and leading coefficient. For 1, is 1 a polynomial? No. Why not? Because it has a negative exponent, so this would be not a polynomial. What about 2? Yes. 2 is a polynomial. How would we put it in standard form? What would go first?
11x squared plus 12x square root 7.
Awesome. 11x squared plus 12x minus square root 7. Now, what's its degree?
2.
Degree is 2. What do we call something with the degree of 2? Quadratic. Quadratic. And what is our leading coefficient? 11. And what is our constant?
7 and
Square root 7. Negative square root 7. Constant. All right, and let's look at 4 real quick. Is 4 a polynomial? Four is not a polynomial. Why is it not a polynomial? Because we have an x on the bottom. That x on the bottom would be like x to the power of -1, and negative exponents mean that it's not a polynomial. So not a polynomial. I'm only going to do a few questions from each section. So whatever we don't do in class, you have to finish. So you guys can do number 3 on your own. From the next section, let's do number 1 together. Number 5, the first one. So here it says evaluate the function for the given value of x. So I'm going to take the value of x that it gives me. It says x is equal to -1. And I'm going to plug it into all of the x's in the question. So when you plug it in, I would recommend plugging it in parentheses. That way you know which value has the exponent, especially if it's a negative number. So we have -1 cubed plus 5 times -1 squared plus 9 times -1 plus 4. Let's follow our order of operations. What's -1 to the 3rd power? -1, but we have a negative out front. So what's -1? Positive 1. And then what is -1 to the 2nd power? Positive 1. And 5 times 1 would be 5. And then 9 times -1? -9 plus 4. 1 plus 5 is?
Can you please send Juan Calvar to Student Services for his ID?
Yes. 6 minus 9. And -3 plus 4? 1. So we got 1. So for these questions, just plug it in. Just be super careful with the signs. All you're doing is evaluating. Just be careful when you're doing the math. All right, let's look at number 8. So it says describe the end behavior of the graph of the function. Which term am I looking at to describe the end behavior? The highest degree, so that would be -7x to the 6th power. The rest of the question does not matter. We're only looking at that term. Now, is our degree even or odd? Even. So does that mean they go in the same direction or opposite? Same direction. Is our leading coefficient positive or negative? Negative. So are they going to go both up or both down? They're both going to go down. So how would we put that in words? Falls left and falls right. All right, let's do a graphing one. Let's do 11 on the right side. So with graphing, we want to determine our end behavior and plug in some values to get points on the graph. On the test, and just like from the notes, they plugged in 5 values, or on the quiz, I also want you to plug in 5 values. So I would say plug in -2, -1, 0, 1, and 2. So I need to see at least 5 points on your graph. So let's start by plugging in -2. We have 4 minus 2 times -2 squared minus -2 to the 4th power. What's -2 squared? 4. So this would be 2 times 4. And what's -2 to the 4th power? It'd be positive 16. So, well, the minus out front makes it a -16. So we have 4 minus 8 minus 16. 4 minus 8 is -4. And then -4 minus 16 would be -20. Next, let's plug in -1. So 4 minus 2 times -1 squared minus -1 to the 4th power. What's -1 squared? 1. And 1 times -2? Be -2. What is -1 to the 4th power?
1.
Positive 1. But that minus outside makes it a -1. So 4 minus 2? And 2 minus 1? 1. So we plugged in -1 and got 1. I'm going to graph those 2 points before I start plugging in more. Our first point is going to be -2, -20. So we're going to go to the left to -2 and down -20. It's going to be way off of our graph down here. That's fine. We'll estimate. The next point was -1, 1. So we're going to go to the left to -1 and up 1. Next, let's plug in 0. 4 minus 2 times 0 squared minus 0 to the 4th power. So that would be 4 minus 0 minus 0, so that is just 4. So our next point would be 0, 4. We stay at 0 and go up 4. What's next? Plug in 1. So we have 4 minus 2 times 1 squared minus 1 to the 4th power. 4 minus 2 minus 1. 4 minus 2 is 2, and 2 minus 1 would be 1. So my next point is 1, 1. For the right one, up 1. And then lastly, let's plug in 2. We have 4 minus 2 times 2 squared minus 2 to the 4th power. For this 2 squared is 4. And 4 times -2 would be -8. And 2 to the 4th power would be 16, so minus 16. So again, here this would be -20. So our next point would be 2, -20. So we're going to go right 2, down 20. Now let's talk about our end behavior of the graph. Which term am I going to look at to determine the end behavior? The highest degree. So which one's that? Negative x to the fourth power. X to the fourth power, is that even or odd? Even. And does even mean that they go in the same direction or opposite? Same. It's a negative x to the fourth power. So are they both going to go up or both go down? They're both going to go down. So out of my point farthest to the left, I'm going to have an arrow that goes down. And out of my point farthest to the right, I'm going to have an arrow that goes down. And then in between, I'm going to connect the dots. So my graph is going to look something like that. Just make sure that you have your 5 points and the end behavior. That's what we're looking for. So for these types of questions, make sure you know which one's what. If our degree is 1, then what would the type be? Linear. If our degree is 2, quadratic. If our degree is 3, cubic. If our degree is 4, quartic. All right, so let's take a look at number 9. So number 9, we're describing the end behavior of our function. Which term am I looking at for number 9 to determine the end behavior? Awesome, 4x to the 5th power. We are looking at the term with the highest degree. Sometimes it's not going to be in standard form, so it may not be our first term. The rest of the equation does not matter. So we can ignore everything else. We're just looking at the one with the highest degree. Now here for number 9 is the degree of 5, is it even or odd? Odd. Does odd mean that they're going to go in the same direction or opposite directions? Opposite. So our arrows are going to go in opposite directions. It is a positive leading coefficient. So what does that tell us? So the positive or negative coefficient tells us what our right arrow does. Is our right arrow going to go up or down? It goes up. When it's positive, our right arrow goes up. So what's the left arrow going to do? It goes down. So when we put this into words, we would say falls left and rises right. All right, next, we're going to be graphing our polynomials. Just like from the notes when we graph, I need to see 5 points. So I would recommend plugging in -2, just like the chart from the notes. We are going to plug in -2, -1, 0, 1, and 2. So once we have our 5 points, we also need to know what our end behavior is, and then we're just going to put that all on the graph. All right, so first we want to plug in -2. So I'm going to plug in -2 into all of my x's. So I have -2 to the 5th power minus 2 to the minus -2 times 2 to the power 4 plus -2 minus 2. Be super careful with your signs. I would always recommend, especially when it's negative, plug it in into parentheses. What is -2 to the 5th power? -32. Next, we have -2 to the 4th power, which would be 16 times -2, -32. Then this would be -2 minus 2. So -32 minus 32, -64 minus 2, -66, and then minus another 2. -68. It'll be way, way, way off of our graph, but that's fine. -68. So our first point is going to be -2, -68. So we'll go ahead and plot it. We're going to go to the left 2 and down, way, way, way off here. Next, let's plug in -1. So we have negative 1 to the 5th power minus 2 times negative 1 to the 4th power plus negative 1 minus 2. What's negative 1 to the 5th power? Negative 1. Negative 1 to the 4th power would be 1, and 1 times negative 2? Negative 2. Minus 1 minus 2. So it's negative 1 minus 2. Negative 3. Negative 3 minus 1? Negative 4. And negative 4 minus 2? Negative 6. So we plugged in negative 1 and got negative 6. So our next point would be negative 1 comma negative 6. So we're going to go to the left to negative 1 and down negative 6. Next, we're going to plug in 0. So 0 to the 5th power minus 2 times 0 to the 4th power plus 0 minus 2. So this would be 0 minus 2, which is negative 2. So I'm going to stay at 0 and go down to negative 2. Next, we want to plug in 1. So 1 to the 5th power minus 2 times 1 to the 4th power plus 1 minus 2. So that would be 1 minus 2 plus 1 minus 2. What's 1 minus 2? Negative 1 plus 1? 0, and 0 minus 2? Negative 2. So we plugged in negative 1, we plugged in positive 1 and got negative 2. So our next point, we go to the right one and down 2. And lastly, we're going to plug in 2. So 2 to the 5th power minus 2 times 2 to the 4th power plus 2 minus 2. 2 to the 5th power is 32 minus, what's 2 to the 4th power? 16. 16 times 2? 32. Plus 2 minus 2. What's 32 minus 32? 0. And 2 minus 2? 0. Oh, nice. So we plugged in 2 and got 0. So we go to the right 2, stay at 0. What's next? Connect the dots, but what else do we need to know? The end behavior. Which term am I looking at for the end behavior? X to the 5th power. The rest of it doesn't matter. So x to the 5th power. Is it even or odd degree? Odd. So are they going to go in the same direction or opposite? Opposite. How do I know which arrow is going to go in which direction? Is it positive?
No.
Is there a negative there? Yes, it's positive. This would be a positive x to the 5th power. So what's my right arrow going to do? Right arrow goes up. Positive means that the right arrow goes up. What's our left arrow going to do? Go down. So out of my point farthest to the right, I'm going to put an arrow that goes up. Out of my point farthest to the left, I have an arrow that goes down. And then in between, we're going to connect the dots. So it looks like that. Any questions? Good here?
Yeah.
Awesome. From 4.2, I think I trust that you guys know how to combine your like terms with questions 1 through 4. When subtracting, what do I need to do first? Distribute. You distribute the negative and then combine your like terms. Let's do number 6. So number 6, we just have to make sure everything in our first set gets multiplied to everything in the second. So starting with 2x squared. What's 2x squared times negative 5x squared? Negative 10x to the 4th. Perfect. What's 2x squared times negative 2x? Negative 4x to the 3rd power. And 2x squared times 4? 8x squared. Next, let's move on to 3x. What's 3x times 5x squared? Negative 15x to the 3rd power. Be super careful with your exponents, because if you accidentally said squared here and you miss the x, you're going to end up combining it with the wrong like term, and it'll throw off your answer. So just be careful in multiplying these together. 3x times negative 2x. Negative 6x squared. And 3x times 4, 12x. Now let's move on to negative 1. Negative 1 times negative 5x squared. Positive 5x squared. Negative 1 times negative 2x would be positive 2x. And negative 1 times 4, negative 4. Now let's combine our like terms. Starting with the highest degree, we have negative 10x to the 4th power. Next, let's move on to our cubes. Negative 4x cubed minus 15x cubed would be what? Negative 19x to the 3rd power. With our x squareds, we have 3 of them. 8x squared minus 6x squared plus 5x squared. Well, what's 8 minus 6? 2, and 2 plus 5? 7, so plus 7x squared. Then 12x plus 2x. 14x minus 4. So this would be our answer. All right, let's look at 11. How do I multiply 11 when I have 3 binomials? Awesome. Multiply the first 2 together. We'd get an answer. And then multiply the 3rd one to it too. I'll let you guys do that one on your own. But also looking at 16. When I have a binomial squared, we could either use our shortcut, or how else could we do that? We could FOIL. Write it twice. So we have PQ plus 2 times PQ plus 2. And then FOIL it out. Any questions here? All right, let's go to the next page. Be careful, even though it's in parentheses, some people like to look at this and just want to FOIL them right off the bat. Pay attention. If you have a plus sign in the middle, you have to add them. If you have a minus sign in the middle, what do you have to do first? Distribute the minus. So that would change the sign of everything behind it. Let's do 5. So we're finding the products. We have to make sure everything in our first parentheses gets multiplied to everything in the second. So starting with x squared. What's x squared times x squared? X to the 4th power. What's x squared times negative 3x? Negative 3x to the 3rd power. And what's x squared times negative 6? Negative 6x squared. What's negative 7x times x squared? Negative 7x to the 3rd power. What's negative 7x times negative 3x? 21x squared. And negative 7x times negative 6? So plus 42x. Now let's move on to negative 2. Negative 2 times x squared? Negative 2x squared. Negative 2 times negative 3x? Positive 6x. And negative 2 times negative 6? Positive 12. Be super careful with your signs here and the degrees. Just make sure you're not rushing these questions. Pay attention. If you made a little mistake on your exponent and you had the wrong exponent, when you combine like terms, it's going to throw everything off. So just be careful. Last step is we want to combine like terms. We're going to start with x to the 4th power. Then our x to the 3rd power is what's negative 3x to the 3rd power minus 7x to the 3rd power. Negative 10x cubed. And then x squared. I have 3 of them. Negative 6x squared plus 21x squared. What would that be? 15x squared minus 2x squared? 13x squared. Perfect. Then our x is 42x plus 6x. 48x, and then plus 12. Any questions here? For something like number 9, when we just have one term times a trinomial, we would just distribute that to each thing. How do I multiply something like 10? Multiply the first 2 together, we'd have to FOIL these, and then multiply the 3rd one to it. What about for 15? 15, we have a shortcut that we could use, but if we forgot our shortcut, what else could we do? Write it twice and FOIL it out. So it'd be like saying 6t plus 7 times 6t plus 7, and then we would FOIL. All right, let's go to the next page so we can practice our Pascal's triangle. So on the next page, we have 2 Pascal's triangle questions. And then it also says complete the missing values and bottom row of Pascal's triangle. So let's look at 7 on the bottom. In that first blank in row 2, what's going to go in that spot all the way on the right? 1. Awesome. Pascal's triangle always starts with 1 and ends with 1. Now the next row, in row 3, what's going to go in that spot?
3.
How'd you know 3? Because 1 plus 2 is 3. You just add the 2 numbers above it. So if you had something like this on the quiz, where we just asked you to fill in the blanks, this would almost be like giving you Pascal's triangle, but you gotta make sure you understand what the numbers come from. And then in the next row, what would go in the blank? 4, awesome, because that would be 1 plus 3. And then in the last row, the 6th row, what would it start with?
1.
And what would be next?
6.
Then?
15.
And then?
9.
And then?
16.
And?
6. 1.
Awesome. All right, and I'll let you guys pick. Do you want to do 1 or 2? All right, let's do 1. All right, 1 is our 4th degree. What are our coefficients in the 4th row? In the triangle on the bottom. 4th row. 1, 4, 6, 4, 1. Remember, the 4th row, the second number is going to be 4. So even though we have a row here, this is row 0. So it doesn't count. So the 4th row would be this one. The one that has the 4 in it. All right, next. Our first term is going to be 2x. So we have 2x to what power? To the 4th power. Then 2x to the 3rd power. Then 2x to the 2nd. Then 2x to the 1st. Then 2x to the 0. In our next row, we have 3. 3 to what power?
0.
3 to the power of 0. Then 3 to the power of 1. 3 to the power of 3 to the power of, and 3 to the power of. Notice how our coefficients in each row are always going to add up to the exponent. So 4 plus 0 is 4. 3 plus 1, 2 plus 2, 1 plus 3, 0 plus 4. So it'll always add up to the exponent, so you can always check your work that way. Now let's combine. Well, what is 3 to the power of 0? 1. So that's going to go away. What's 2x to the power of 0? 1. So that one goes away. So you can always just cross out the ones that are the power of 0. So we have 2x to the power of 4. Be careful here because we have to distribute the 4 to the 2 and the x. What's 2 to the power of 4? 16. And x to the power of 4 would be x to the 4th power. So 16x to the 4th power times 1 is 16x to the 4th power. Now we have a plus sign in the middle, so that means all of our terms are going to get a plus sign in the middle. So let's move on to the next one. What's 2 to the 3rd power? 8. So 8x to the 3rd power. Well, we have 4 times 8 times 3. What's 4 times 8? And 32 times 3? 96. So 96 what? X cubed. Perfect. Plus 2x squared. We have to square the 2 and square the x. That would be 4x squared. What's 3 squared? 9. So here, got to be careful. We have 6 times 4, which is what? 24. And 24 times 9. 4 times 9 is 36. And 2 times 9 is 18 plus 3, 21. So 216.
Thank you.
216x squared. Any questions there? All right, let's move on to the third one, or fourth one. So we have 4 times 2x. What is 3 to the 3rd power? 27. So what's 4 times 2? 8. So here we have 27 times 8. 8 times 7 is 56. 8 times 2? 16 plus 5? 21. So we have 216 again. So plus 216x. And then lastly, 3 to the 4th power? 81. So this would be our answer. So let's look at number 2. So which row of Pascal's triangle am I looking at here? The 5th row. So be careful. The first row, the one that just has one number, that is row 0. The 5th row is the one that the second number has 5 in it. This would be our 5th row. So what are our coefficients from our 5th row?
10. 5, 1.
Perfect. 1, 5, 10, 10, 5, 1. Awesome. Now let's start with our first term. That would be xy. So here we have xy to what power? To the 5th power. We started with the 5th power in our question, so we start with the 5th power. So xy to the 5th power, xy to the 4th, xy to the 3rd, xy to the 2nd, xy to the 1st, and then xy to the 0. What is xy to the power of 0? 1. So anything to the power of 0 we can cross off, get rid of. Next, our next term is 3. So we're going to start with 3 to the power of 0. Then 3 to the power of 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 4, and 3 to the power of 5. What's 3 to the power of 0? 1. So we can get rid of that one too. Now let's multiply our columns together. the fun part. Be careful, if you have two terms, like x, y, or if you had 2x or something like that, you have to distribute the 5 to the x and to the y. You have to distribute it to both terms. So in the last class we did number 1, we had 2x to the 4th power. We had to distribute the 4th power to the 2 and the x. So it has to get distributed to both terms. So here we have x to the 5th power times y to the 5th power times 1, which would be just x to the 5th power times y to the 5th power. I'm going to save the signs till the end because we see that we have a minus in the middle here, so we know it's not going to be all pluses. So I'm going to save the signs for the very end. Let's do our next column. What's the first thing I should do here? I'm going to distribute the exponent and multiply the 3 and the 5. What's 3 times 5? 15. So 15, what? X to the 4th, y to the 4th. Then with our next one, what's 3 squared? 9. So what's 10 times 9? 90. 90, what would come next? X to the 3rd, y to the 3rd. Next, what's 3 to the 3rd power? 27 times 10? 270. What would come next? X to the 2nd, y to the 2nd. Next column, what's 3 to the 4th power? 81. And 81 times 5? If we don't know it right off the top of our head, write it down. 5 times 405. Perfect. So 405, what? XY. And then lastly, 3 to the 5th power. Well, we just did 3 to the 4th power, which was 81, and 81 times another 3. 8 times 3 is, so 243. All right, now what do our signs do? They change. How? So we start with a plus. Our first term is positive, but the first sign that we're going to write down is going to be a minus. So our leading term is always going to be positive, then minus, plus, I'm going to do it in a different color just so we can see. Minus, plus, minus, plus, minus. So the signs alternate. When you have a minus in the middle, signs alternate. The rest of the review is your homework.